The purple sky of Xerion Prime burned with orange flames as explosions echoed across the crystal forest. Sergeant Jake Martinez crouched behind a fallen tree trunk, his rifle ready in his hands. The war between humans and the Vorthok aliens had been going on for 3 long years, and Jake was tired of all the fighting and death. "Sergeant, we got movement up ahead," whispered Corporal Lisa Wong through her helmet radio. She was hiding behind a large blue crystal about 50 feet away. Her voice sounded nervous. Jake looked through his scope and saw smoke rising from a crash site deeper in the forest. The trees here were made of some kind of living crystal that grew like normal trees but sparkled in the dim light. They had been sent to find information about enemy movements, but this looked like something different. "Danny, circle around to the left," Jake told Private Danny Cooper over the radio. "Lisa, stay where you are and watch our backs. I'm going to check out that crash." Jake moved carefully through the crystal trees. His boots made soft crunching sounds on the purple grass. Every few steps, he stopped to listen for enemy soldiers. But all he could hear was the crackling of fires and the strange humming sound the crystal trees made in the wind. When he reached the crash site, Vorthok transport ship split in half. The metal was twisted and black from fire. Pieces of the ship were scattered everywhere. Jake had seen many crashed ships during the war, but something felt different about this one. The ship looked fancier than normal Vorthok military transports. He moved closer with his rifle raised. The front part of the ship was crushed against a large crystal boulder. Jake could see inside through a hole in the metal. That's when he heard it, a soft groaning sound. Jake froze. Someone was alive in there. His training told him to call for backup and wait. Enemy survivors could be dangerous. But the groaning sound came again, weaker this time. It sounded like pain, like someone who was badly hurt. Jake made a quick decision. He climbed through the hole in the ship's side, inside the crashed transport. Jake saw seats covered in a material that looked like silk but felt rough, strange. Symbols were carved into the walls. Emergency lights flickered red and blue. And there, trapped under a heavy metal beam, was a Vorthok. But this wasn't like any Vorthok soldier Jake had seen before. Most Vorthok were tall and thin, with gray skin and yellow eyes. This one was different. She had the same tall build, but her skin was pale blue instead of gray. She wore robes made of silver fabric instead of military armor. Golden jewelry hung around her neck and arms. Even hurt and trapped, she looked important. The Vorthok woman opened her eyes when she heard Jake enter. Her eyes were not yellow like other Vorthok, but deep purple. When she saw Jake's human face and military uniform, fear flashed across her features. She tried to move, but the metal beam held her down. Jake could see dark blue blood flowing from cuts on her arms and head. Vorthok. Blue blood meant the injury was serious. Didn't. Jake had learned basic alien first aid during his training. The right thing to do was capture her. If she was important enough to have fancy clothes and jewelry, she might have valuable information. His commanders would want to question her. But looking at her trapped and bleeding, Jake couldn't think about military orders. He set his rifle aside and knelt beside her. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said slowly. He didn't know if she understood English, but he tried to make his voice calm. The Vorthok woman stared at him with wide purple eyes. She said something in her own language. It sounded like a question. Jake examined the metal beam. It was heavy, but he thought he could lift it. "This is going to hurt," he told her, "but I need to get this off you." He put his hands under the beam and lifted. His muscles strained, but the beam moved up a few inches. The Vorthok woman quickly pulled her legs free. Jake saw that one of her legs was bent in the wrong direction. Broken, Jake gently lowered the beam back down. The woman tried to sit up but fell back with a cry of pain. More blue blood was flowing from a cut on her forehead. "Stay still, Jake," said he pulled his medical kit from his belt. During basic training, all soldiers learned how to treat both human and alien injuries. Jake had always been good at it. He cleaned the cut on her head first. The woman watched him with curious eyes. Her fear seemed to be fading, replaced by confusion. "Ash." Jake guessed she had never seen a human help a Vorthok before. "Sergeant Martinez, what's your status?" Lisa's voice crackled through his radio. Jake pressed the radio button. Found a survivor. Give me 5 more minutes. Survivor. Sergeant, we should call this in. Just 5 minutes, Lisa. Keep watching for enemy forces. Jake turned back to the injured woman. He wrapped a bandage around her head wound, then looked at her broken leg. He had learned that Vorthok bones were harder than human bones, but healed in a similar way. He found 2 pieces of metal from the crashed ship and used them to make a splint. The woman spoke again in her language.
Oh.
This time her voice sounded different. Less afraid, almost thankful. I wish I could understand you, Jake said as he tied the splint in place. But I think you're saying thank you. The woman reached up with one hand and touched Jake's face gently. Her fingers were longer than human fingers and felt cool. She looked into his eyes for a long moment, then spoke one word in English. Why? Was surprised she knew any human language. Because you're hurt, he said simply. And I'm a medic. It's what I do. She studied his face like she was trying to understand something very important. Then she reached to her neck and removed a small crystal pendant on a silver chain. The crystal was perfectly clear and seemed to glow with its own inner light. She pressed the pendant into Jake's hand. Her fingers closed his around it. Honor, she said in careful English. I remember Sergeant Martinez. Danny's voice shouted through the radio. Vorthok ships incoming. 3 of them, coming in fast. Jake looked out through the hole in the crashed ship. He could see 3 Vorthok rescue vessels approaching through the crystal trees. They would be here in minutes. Jake helped the woman stand up. She was much taller than him, even injured. He supported her weight as they moved toward the ship's exit. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded and took a few careful steps. The splint held her broken legs steady. Outside the crashed ship, Jake could hear the Vorthok rescue ships getting closer. Soon this place would be full of enemy soldiers. He needed to get his team out of here fast. But first, he helped the injured woman to a safe spot behind some crystal rocks where the rescue ships would easily find her. She would be protected from any fighting, and her own people could take care of her injuries. Before he left, the woman grabbed his arm. She said something long in Vorthok, her voice serious and formal. Then she switched to English again. I remember, she repeated. Honor, I remember. Jake nodded and ran back toward his team. As he moved through the crystal forest, he could hear the Vorthok ships landing. Soon they would find their injured comrade and take her to safety. Let's move out, Jake called to Lisa and Danny. Need to get back to base now? As they ran through the forest toward their own transport, Jake clutched the crystal pendant in his pocket. He didn't know what it meant, or why the injured Vorthok had given it to him. He just knew that something important had happened in that crashed ship, something that felt bigger than the war around them. Behind them, the sounds of Vorthok voices grew louder as the rescue team found their survivor. Jake hoped she would be okay. Even though she was the enemy, he hoped her people would take good care of her. Jake didn't know that the woman he had saved was Queen Zerathal, heir to the Vorthok throne. He didn't know that his simple act of kindness would change everything. He just knew he had done the right thing, even if his commanders might not understand. The crystal pendant felt warm in his pocket as they reached their ship and flew away from Xerion Prime. 1 year had passed since the crash on Xerion Prime, but Jake Martinez still woke up thinking about purple eyes and blue blood. The war between humans and Vorthok had gotten much worse. Every day brought news of more battles, more destroyed cities, more dead soldiers on both sides. Jake stood in his small room aboard the battleship U.S. Defender, looking out at the stars through a tiny window. He pulled the crystal pendant from under his shirt and held it up to the light. It still glowed with that strange inner brightness, just like the day the Vorthok woman had given it to him. He wondered about her sometimes. Was she still alive? Had her broken leg healed properly? Did she ever think about the human soldier who helped her? But mostly Jake felt guilty. Martinez, you're late for briefing, called Corporal Lisa Wong from the doorway. She was still on his team, still his friend, but she looked tired all the time now. The war was wearing everyone down. Jake quickly tucked the pendant back under his shirt. Coming, he said. In the briefing room, Lieutenant Colonel Amanda Price stood in front of a large screen showing battle reports. The numbers were bad. Human colonies were falling to Vorthok attacks almost every week. The enemy seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Intelligence suggests the Vorthok have a new leader, Colonel Price said to the assembled soldiers. Someone smart and dangerous. Their attacks have become more organized, more strategic. Jake listened, but his mind wandered. Could the woman he saved have something to do with these new tactics? He shook his head. One injured alien couldn't change the whole war. After the briefing, Jake walked through the ship's corridors. The Defender was huge with over 3,000 crew members, but it felt cramped and gray. The walls were metal, the lights were harsh, white, and everything smelled like cleaning chemicals and recycled air. He passed the medical bay where Dr. Kevin Hart was treating wounded soldiers. Jake had been spending a lot of time there lately. Not because he was hurt, but because helping injured people made him feel useful. It reminded him why he became a medic in the first place. Jake, Dr. Hart called out. Can you help me with this? Burn patient. Jake hurried over to help. The patient was a young pilot who had been shot down during the last battle. His hands were badly burned from trying to escape his burning fighter ship, as Jake carefully cleaned and bandaged the pilot's hands. He thought about the Vorthok woman's injuries. He had been just as gentle with her, just as careful, but she was supposed to be the enemy. Good work, Dr. Hart said when they finished. You have steady hands and a calm manner. The patients trust you. Jake nodded but didn't feel proud. Trust seemed like a dangerous thing these days. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about all the people who had died in the past year. Human colonies burned by Vorthok weapons. Vorthok ships destroyed by human missiles. Millions of deaths. On both sides? Could he have prevented some of it? If he had captured the Vorthok woman instead of helping her, would the war be over by now? Maybe she really was someone important. Maybe she had information that could have saved lives. Jake got up and walked to the ship's observation deck. A few other soldiers were there, staring out at the stars and probably thinking similar thoughts. The war made everyone question their choices. Can't sleep either? Asked Private Danny Cooper, joining Jake at the large window. Too much thinking, Jake replied. Danny was quiet for a moment. You know, I've been wondering about that day on Xerion Prime. When we found that crashed ship, Jake's heart beat faster. What about it? You were in there for a long time. When you came out, you seemed different, like something had changed. Tried to keep his voice normal. I just checked for survivors. Standard procedure. Danny nodded slowly. Right. Standard procedure. But his expression suggested he didn't completely believe it. The next morning, Jake was called to Colonel Price's office. The colonel was a tough woman in her 50s who had been fighting aliens for most of her adult life. Her office was small, but neat, with pictures of her family on Earth and commendation certificates on the walls. Sit down, Martinez, she said without looking up from her computer screen. Jake sat in the uncomfortable metal chair across from her desk. He wondered if Danny had reported their conversation from last night. Your performance evaluations have been concerning, Colonel Price said, finally looking at him. Your shooting scores are down. You seem distracted during missions. Your team members say you're not the same soldier you were a year ago. Jake wanted to explain but didn't know how. I'm just tired, ma'am. The war has been going on for a long time. That's not good enough, Martinez. This war depends on every soldier doing their best. I'm sending you to psychological evaluation. Jake's stomach dropped. Psych evaluations were serious business. If the doctors decided he was unfit for duty, he could be sent home in disgrace. Or worse, they might discover his secret about the Vorthok woman. Yes, ma'am, he said. Dr. Kevin Hart conducted the evaluation himself. Jake sat in the doctor's small office, trying to look relaxed while his heart pounded. Tell me about your nightmares, Dr. Hart said, reading from Jake's file. I dream about battles sometimes, dead friends, normal stuff for soldiers. Lisa Wong mentioned you've been showing unusual mercy toward enemy combatants. She said you spent time treating wounded Vorthok instead of securing the battlefield. Jake remembered the incidents Lisa was talking about. During the last 3 battles, he had found injured Vorthok soldiers and couldn't help but treat their wounds before capturing them. It seemed like the right thing to do, but apparently his team had noticed. They were badly hurt, Jake said. It felt wrong to let them suffer. Dr. Hart wrote something in his notes. The enemy has shown no such mercy to our people. Why do you think you feel differently? That was the question Jake couldn't answer honestly. Because one injured Vorthok woman had looked at him with trust instead of hate. Because she had called him honorable. Because helping her had felt more right than any military order he had ever followed. I don't know, Jake said. Maybe I'm just tired of all the killing. The evaluation went on for 2 hours. Dr. Hart asked about Jake's childhood, his reasons for joining the military, his feelings about the war, which Jake answered as honestly as he could without mentioning the crystal pendant hidden under his shirt. Later, that week, Jake was assigned to light duty while the doctors decided if he was fit for combat. Instead of going on dangerous missions, he helped in the medical bay and did maintenance work around the ship. The change gave him time to think, which made things worse. Every day brought news of more battles, more casualties. The Vorthok seemed to be getting stronger and smarter. Some intelligence reports suggested they had new leadership that was more organized than before. Jake wondered again about the woman he had saved. Was she part of this new leadership? Had his moment of kindness somehow made the war worse? One evening, while Jake was organizing medical supplies, an emergency alarm sounded throughout the ship. All hands were called to battle stations. The Defender was under attack. Jake ran to his assigned position in the medical bay, where wounded soldiers would be brought during the fighting. Through the ship's intercom, he could hear the battle raging outside. Explosions echoed through the metal walls. The lights flickered every time the ship was hit. The first wounded soldiers arrived quickly. Jake worked alongside Dr. Hart and the medical team, treating burns, broken bones, and worse injuries. The battle seemed to go on forever. Then, the medical bay doors opened and stretcher bearers brought in something unexpected. 3 wounded Vorthok soldiers. They were found floating in an escape pod, one of the stretcher bearers explained. Their own ship left them behind. Dr. Hart looked at the aliens with professional interest. Set them down over there. We'll treat them after our own people. But Jake was already moving toward the injured Vorthok. One of them was unconscious with a head wound. Another had a broken arm. The third was awake but bleeding badly from his chest. Martinez, what are you doing? Dr. Hart called. Jake didn't answer. He knelt beside the most badly injured Vorthok and began treating his chest wound. The alien looked up at him with yellow eyes full of surprise and pain. Why? The Vorthok whispered. In broken English, just like the woman on Xerion Prime had asked, Jake's hands worked steadily, cleaning and bandaging the wound. Because you're hurt, he said quietly, and I'm a medic. The other medical staff stopped what they were doing to watch. It was unusual for humans to spend time treating enemy soldiers when their own people needed help, but Jake couldn't stop himself. Something about helping injured Vorthok felt important, even necessary. Like he was balancing some cosmic scale that had been tipped the wrong way. As he worked, Jake felt the crystal pendant warm against his chest. He thought about purple eyes and gentle fingers touching his face. He thought about the word honor, spoken in careful English. Maybe his guilt was misplaced. Maybe showing mercy wasn't weakness. Maybe the woman on Xerion Prime had given him something more valuable than information or military advantage. Maybe she had given him back his humanity. The battle ended an hour later with the Vorthok ships retreating. Jake had successfully treated all 3 enemy soldiers. They would live to be questioned by intelligence officers, but they would live. Jake was eating breakfast in the ship's mess hall when every communication screen in the room suddenly turned red. The loud alarm that meant emergency message started blaring throughout the UES Defender. All personnel report to stations immediately. Came the announcement over the ship's speakers. Priority 1 communication from Alliance Command. Jake dropped his fork and hurried toward the main briefing room, along with hundreds of other soldiers. The corridors were full of people talking, in worried voices. Priority 1 messages usually meant bad news, like a major battle lost or an important colony destroyed, in the briefing room. Admiral Helen Rodriguez appeared on the giant screen. She was the highest-ranking officer in the Terran Alliance fleet. Based at headquarters on Earth, Her face looked serious but also confused, like she didn't quite believe what she was about to say. 3 hours ago, Admiral Rodriguez began, we received a direct communication from the Vorthok Royal Palace. This is the first official message from their government in over 2 years of war. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. He touched the crystal pendant under his shirt without thinking about it. The message was sent by Queen Xerathal, the new ruler of the Vorthok Empire. Her father, the old king, died in battle 6 months ago. Since then, she has been consolidating power and making changes to their military strategy. The room was completely silent. Every soldier was listening carefully. This was the first time they had heard the name of the Vorthok leader who had been causing so much trouble. Queen Xerathal has requested a secret peace negotiation, Admiral Rodriguez continued. The meeting is to take place on the neutral moon of Desia in 7 days. Excited murmurs filled the room. Peace negotiations. After 3 years of brutal war, could it really be possible? But Admiral Rodriguez wasn't finished. The Queen has made one very specific demand. She has requested the presence of, quote, the human soldier who carries the crystal of Vorthmar, end quote. Jake's blood turned to ice. Several soldiers near him started looking around the room, wondering what that meant. But Jake knew exactly what it meant. Crystal pendant around his neck suddenly felt heavy as a rock. We don't know what this phrase refers to, Admiral Rodriguez said. Our linguists tell us that Vorthmar is an ancient Vorthok word, meaning sacred honor or noble trust. We are asking all personnel to report any contact with Vorthok civilians or unusual artifacts immediately. The screen went dark and Colonel Price took over the briefing. This is our chance to end the war, she said. We need to figure out what the Queen is talking about. Anyone who has information about this crystal should report to my office immediately. Jake sat frozen in his chair as the other soldiers filed out of the room. His secret was exposed. Somehow, the Vorthok Queen knew about the pendant. But how is that possible? And why did she want to see him? Jake, Lisa Wong said, touching his shoulder. You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay? Jake nodded weakly. Just surprised about the peace talks, I guess. But as soon as Lisa left, Jake hurried to his room. He pulled out the crystal pendant and stared at it. The clear crystal seemed to pulse with light, almost like it was alive. He had never learned what the symbols carved into the silver chain meant. Jake knew he should report to Colonel Price immediately, but he was scared. What if they thought he was a spy? What if they court-martialed him for not reporting his contact? With an enemy? What if this was all some kind of trap? He spent the rest of the day avoiding his commanding officers and trying to figure out what to do. By evening, he had made up his mind. He would tell the truth and accept whatever consequences came. Jake knocked on Colonel Price's office door. Just after dinner time. Come in, she called. Colonel Price was working at her computer, but she looked up when Jake entered. Martinez. I was wondering when you'd show up. Jake's heart jumped. Ma'am, sit down, she said, closing her computer. I've been thinking about your behavior over the past year. It's the way you treat enemy prisoners, your performance issues, and now this message about a crystal. Jake sat down slowly. Colonel, I need to tell you something. Yes, you do. Bad. She leaned back in her chair. Show me. With shaking hands, Jake pulled the pendant from under his shirt. Colonel Price's eyes widened. When she saw it, where did you get that? She asked quietly. Jake told her everything. The crash on Xerion Prime, the injured Vorthok woman, his decision to help her instead of capturing her, the pendant she had pressed into his hands before he left. Colonel Price listened without interrupting. When Jake finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You realize this could be considered treason, she said finally. Yes, ma'am. You also realize that woman was probably Queen Xerathal herself. The timing matches perfectly with intelligence. Reports about her being missing for several days last year. Jake felt dizzy. He had saved the queen of the enemy empire. I didn't know who she was. She was just hurt and needed help. Colonel Price stood up and walked to her window. The question now is whether this is a trap or a real opportunity for peace. What do you think, ma'am? I think Colonel Price said slowly that you might have just changed the course of this war. Within hours, Jake found himself in a secure conference room with the ship's highest-ranking officers. Admiral Rodriguez appeared on screen from Earth, along with several other Alliance leaders. Sergeant Martinez, Admiral Rodriguez said, "I need you to tell us everything about your encounter with the Queen." Jake repeated his story, this time to a room full of generals and admirals. They asked detailed questions about the Queen's injuries, her behavior, what she said, how she acted. Jake answered as honestly as he could. "The fact that she kept the pendant and remembered you suggests this is genuine," said General Patricia Hill, the Alliance's top military strategist. "But it could still be an elaborate trap. There's only one way to find out," Admiral Rodriguez said. "We're going to accept the meeting request, and Sergeant Martinez is going with the diplomatic team." "Ma'am," Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're the only human who has had personal contact with Queen Zarathal. If she specifically requested the soldier with the crystal, then she wants to see you personally." Commander Nancy Foster, the Alliance's best diplomat, spoke up from the screen. "I'll lead the negotiation team, okay, but Martinez will be our cultural liaison. His relationship with the Queen might be the key to successful talks." Jake felt overwhelmed. A few days ago, he was being evaluated for psychological fitness.
Now he was
being sent on the most important diplomatic mission in human history. "Sir," Jake said carefully, "what if I'm not the right person for this? What if I mess up the negotiations?" Martinez, Admiral Rodriguez said, "Your act of kindness toward an enemy might be what saves both our species. I think you're exactly the right person." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Jake was briefed on diplomatic protocols, Vorthok culture, and negotiation strategies. He practiced formal greetings and learned basic phrases in the Vorthok language. Commander Foster arrived on the Defender with her diplomatic team. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had negotiated treaties with a dozen different alien species. "The key," she told Jake during one of their preparation sessions, "is to be yourself. Don't try to be a diplomat. The Queen asked for you specifically because of who you are, not because of your training." Jake also met the other team members. Stephen Chang was a cultural expert who knew more about Vorthok society than almost any human. Ryan Parker was a security chief whose job was to keep the diplomats safe. Dr. Kevin Hart was coming along as the team medic, which made Jake feel better about everything. "Are you nervous?" Dr. Hart asked Jake the night before they left for the show. "Terrified," Jake admitted. "What if she doesn't remember me? What if this is all a mistake? Then we go home and keep fighting the war," Dr. Hart said simply. What if it's not a mistake? What if your 5 minutes of kindness on Xerion Prime leads to peace? Jake held the crystal pendant up to the light. It glowed as brightly as ever, seeming to pulse with its own heartbeat. "I keep thinking about what?" she said. Jake told the doctor. "Honor, I remember." What if she really did remember? Only one way to find out. The diplomatic ship U.S. Harmony was much smaller than the Defender, but designed for comfort rather than fighting. Jake had his own small cabin with a real window instead of a tiny porthole. As they traveled through space toward the Shah, he spent hours looking out at the stars and wondering what Queen Zerotha would be like now. Would she still have those unusual purple eyes? Would she remember the human soldier who helped her? Or had she become someone completely different, hardened by war and the responsibilities of ruling an empire? Jake pulled out the pendant one more time as Thisha appeared in the ship's windows. The neutral moon was covered in ancient temples and meeting halls where different species had been making peace for thousands of years. "This is it," Commander Foster announced over the ship's intercom. "In a few hours, we'll know if we're looking at the end of the war or the beginning of something even worse." Jake tucked the pendant back under his shirt and took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, he had started this chain of events with a simple choice to help someone who was hurt. He just hoped that choice would lead to something good. The ancient temple on Thisha was bigger than Jake had imagined. Tall stone columns reached up toward a domed ceiling painted with stars from a dozen different worlds. Carved symbols covered every wall, telling the stories of peace treaties made. Over thousands of years, Jake walked beside Commander Foster through the main hall. his dress uniform feeling stiff and uncomfortable. His hands were sweating despite the cool air inside the temple. The crystal pendant felt warm against his chest, almost like it knew they were getting close to its original owner. "Remember," Commander Foster whispered, "let me do the talking. Unless she speaks to you directly, we don't know what kind of protocol she expects." Stephen Chang and Ryan Parker walked behind them, looking alert for any signs of danger. Dr. Hart brought up the rear, carrying his medical bag just in case. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone walls at the far end of the hall. They could see another group approaching from the opposite entrance. Even from a distance, Jake could tell they were Vorthok by their tall, thin shapes and the way they moved with smooth, graceful steps. As the two groups got closer, Jake's heart began pounding harder. The Vorthok delegation wore formal robes in deep blue and silver. Most of them looked like typical Vorthok with gray skin and yellow eyes. But in the center of their group walked someone different. She was taller than the others and moved with obvious authority. Her skin was the same pale blue Jake remembered, and she wore robes made of shimmering silver fabric. Golden jewelry caught the light as she walked. Even from 50 feet away, Jake could see those distinctive purple eyes. Queen. Zarathal looked exactly like the injured woman from the crashed ship, but also completely different. She carried herself like a ruler now, confident and powerful. But when her eyes found Jake across the temple hall, her formal expression changed completely. The queen stopped walking. Her purple eyes went wide with recognition and something that looked like joy. For a moment, the powerful ruler disappeared, and Jake could see the grateful woman who had pressed a crystal into his hands. 1 year ago, the formal meeting was supposed to happen at a large stone table in the center of the temple. Representatives from both sides would sit across from each other and follow diplomatic protocol. But Queen Zerothal had other plans. She walked straight toward Jake. Ignoring the table and the confused looks from both delegations, Jake wasn't sure what to do. Should he bow? Should he salute? Should he wait for her to speak first? Solved his problem by stopping directly in front of him and speaking in perfect English. "Sergeant Jake Martinez," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it. "You look well." "I am very happy to see you again, Your Majesty," Jake managed to say. "I'm happy to see you too, and glad that you recovered from your injuries." "Queen." Zerothal smiled, and Jake was surprised to see that her teeth were similar to human teeth, just slightly sharper. "More than recovered, thanks to your kindness. Boy, you saved far more than my life that day." Behind the queen, Jake could see her advisors looking nervous. A tall Vorthok with scars across his face stepped forward. "My queen," he said in accented English, "perhaps we should begin the formal negotiations." The queen held up one elegant hand without taking her eyes off Jake. In a moment, Admiral Krexter. "First, I must thank the human who changed everything." She reached into her robes and pulled out something that made Jake's breath catch. It was another crystal pendant, identical to the one he wore, but hanging from a golden chain instead of silver. "Do you still carry the crystal of Vorthmar?" she asked. Jake nodded and pulled his pendant from under his shirt. When the two crystals came near each other, they both began glowing brighter than Jake had. "Ever seen before?" "Remarkable," said Stephen Chang quietly. They're responding to each other. Queen Zarathal looked at the glowing crystals with satisfaction. "The crystals of Vorthmar are given only to those who show the highest honor. They are paired, you see. When one is given in trust, the other glows brighter. For the past year, mine has been shining constantly." She looked back at Jake with those amazing purple eyes. "Your kindness that day did more than heal my wounds, Sergeant Martinez. It gave me hope that our species could find a way to coexist, Commander." Foster stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty, we are honored by this meeting. The Alliance hopes we can find a path to peace." "As do I, Commander Foster," the Queen replied. "But first, let me explain why your sergeant's actions were so important." The two groups moved to the stone table, but the formal atmosphere had changed completely. Instead of sitting across from each other like enemies, they arranged themselves more casually. Queen Zerothal chose to sit next to Jake rather than across from him. "When I was injured on Xerion Prime," the Queen began, "I was returning from a secret mission to study human behavior. My father, the old king, believed humans were nothing but violent animals who could never be trusted. Jake listened carefully, fascinated to finally learn the full story. I was supposed to observe human military tactics and report back about your weaknesses. But when Sergeant Martinez found me trapped and hurt, he did something I never expected. Queen paused and looked directly at Jake. He saw a person in pain, not an enemy to exploit. He risked his own safety to help me, asked for nothing in return, and then helped me reach safety when his own people needed him. Admiral Crexter shifted, uncomfortably in his seat. My queen, with respect, one human's behavior does not prove anything about their entire species. Perhaps not, Queen Xerathal agreed. But it proved that cooperation was possible. When I returned to our capital, I argued before the Council of Claws that humans possessed honor and could be reasoned with. She turned to Commander Foster. Many of our leaders disagreed, said I was foolish to trust the word of one human soldier. The war continued and grew worse. What changed? Commander Foster asked. I became queen 6 months ago when my father died in battle. One of my first acts was to research everything about Sergeant Martinez and his unit. I wanted to learn if his kindness was unique or if other humans shared his values. Jake felt nervous. What did you find? Queen Xerathal smiled again. I found that your medical records showed you treating enemy wounded in 3 separate battles. After our encounter, I found reports that your entire unit showed unusual restraint in civilian areas. I found that you specifically requested assignment to medical duties rather than combat roles. She gestured to her advisors. I was able to convince enough of the council that humans could be honorable partners rather than just enemies to defeat. But there was still resistance. A younger Vorthok advisor spoke up. Many still believe this is human trickery, my queen. They think Sergeant Martinez was ordered to help you as part of some complex strategy. Which is why I needed him here. Queen Xerathal explained. I needed the council to see that his kindness was real, not calculated. I needed them to meet the human who risked everything to help a stranger. Suddenly, alarms began ringing throughout the temple. Marine Parker immediately stood up, his hand moving to his weapon. The Vorthok guards did the same thing. What's happening? Commander Foster demanded. A temple administrator rushed into the hall. We're detecting multiple ships approaching, he announced in the universal translator language. Both human and Vorthok vessels, heavily armed. Admiral Crexter's scarred face went dark. The hardliners have found us. Some members of our military never wanted these talks to succeed. Jake could see explosions starting to light up the sky. Outside the temple windows, someone was trying to stop the peace negotiations by force. We need to get you to safety, Your Majesty, one of the Vorthok guards said urgently, but Queen Xerathal shook her head. No. If we run now, the chance for peace dies with us. She looked at Jake. Sergeant Martinez, I need your help again. What can I do? The same thing you did on Xerion Prime? Show them that humans and Vorthok can work together instead of fighting. More. Explosions rocked the temple. Through the windows, Jake could see both human and Vorthok fighter ships engaged in battle above them. The hardliners from both sides had decided to settle things with violence. The temple has defensive shields, the administrator said, but they won't hold for long against this kind of assault. Jake looked around the room at the mix of humans and Vorthok, who had come here hoping for peace. They all looked scared, but they also looked determined. Commander Foster, Jake said, what if we prove the Queen right? What if we show both sides that we can defend this place together? Commander Foster nodded slowly. The temple's defense systems are designed to be operated by multiple species working in coordination. Then let's do it, Queen, Xerathal said. Firmly human and Vorthok, side by side, protecting the hope of peace. Jake felt the crystal pendant grow warm against his chest as he stood up. Just like on Xerion Prime, sometimes helping each other is the only way anyone survives. Outside, the battle was getting closer to the temple. But inside, humans and Vorthok were about to work together for the first time in 3 years. Jake hoped it wouldn't be the last time. The ancient temple shook as another explosion hit the defensive shields outside. Jake ran alongside Queen Xerathal toward the temple's control center, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Behind them, the mixed group of humans and Vorthok followed, all working together for the first time in 3 years. The defense system requires at least 4 operators, the temple administrator explained as they reached a room filled with glowing control panels. 2 for targeting, 2 for power management. It was designed to force cooperation between different species. Jake looked at the complex controls covered in symbols from dozens of worlds. I don't know how to operate alien technology. That's why we work together, Queen Zerathal said, taking position at one of the panels. You handle the human systems. I'll manage the Vorthok controls. Commander Foster moved to another panel while Stephen Chang took the 4th position. The system hummed to life as all 4 operators worked in coordination. Through the large windows, Jake could see the battle raging in the sky above them. Human ships fought against other human ships, while Vorthok vessels attacked their own kind. The hardliners from both sides had joined forces to destroy any chance of peace. Incoming transmission, Ryan Parker announced from a communication station. It's from the attacking fleet. A gruff human voice filled the room. Patricia Hill, of the True Human Alliance. The alien queen and her human collaborators have 5 minutes to surrender before we level that temple. Admiral Krexter's scarred face appeared on another screen. Queen Zerathal, you have betrayed your own species. The Council of Claws declares you unfit to rule. Surrender now, and your death will be quick. Queen Zerathal's purple eyes flashed with anger, but her voice stayed calm. I am trying to save both our peoples from endless war. How does that make me a traitor? Peace with humans is impossible, Admiral Krexter snarled. They are violent animals who only understand force. Jake stepped up to the communication panel. Admiral, my name is Jake Martinez, the human who helped your queen when she was injured. If humans are just violent animals, why did I save her life instead of letting her die? There was silence from the Vorthok Admiral for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice less certain. One act of mercy does not change your nature. Not, Jake admitted, but it's a start. And right now, humans and Vorthok are working together to defend this temple. We're proving that cooperation is possible. The temple shook again as more weapons fire hit the shields. The defensive barrier was starting to weaken under the constant assault. Shields at 60%, Stephen Chang reported. They won't hold much longer. Queen Zerathal worked frantically at her control panel, her long fingers dancing over the alien symbols. I'm redirecting power from non-essential systems. That should buy us more time. Jake watched her work and felt amazed by how much she had changed since that day on Xerion Prime. She was still the same person who had looked at him with grateful purple eyes.
Ow.
But now she carried the confidence and skills of a true leader. Jake, she said without looking up from her controls, I need you to do something important. What? Contact your Alliance command. Tell them what's happening here. If the hardliners succeed in destroying this temple, both our peoples will think. The other side attacked first. The war will become worse than ever. Jake moved to the communication panel and began sending an emergency transmission to Alliance headquarters. But before he could finish, alarms started blaring throughout the temple. Multiple ships incoming, Ryan Parker shouted, with human and Vorthok approaching fast. Through the windows, Jake could see a new fleet of ships arriving. First he thought it was reinforcements for the attackers, but then he noticed something different about these vessels. Those are mixed formations, Commander Foster said with excitement. Human and Vorthok ships flying together. Queen Zerathal looked up from her controls with surprise. That's impossible. Our fleets have never coordinated before. A new voice came over the communication system. This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Terran Alliance fleet. We're here to protect the peace negotiations. Another voice joined in, speaking in the Vorthok language with translation following. This is Fleet Commander Zeltith of the Royal Vorthok Navy. We stand with Queen Zerathal in the hope of peace. Jake felt his heart lift as he watched the mixed fleet engage the hardliner forces above them. For the first time in 3 years, humans and Vorthok were fighting on the same side instead of against each other. The battle in the sky was fierce, but brief. The hardliners had expected to face only the temple's defenses, not a coordinated fleet. Of former enemies working together, within an hour, General Hill and Admiral Krexter were forced to retreat with their remaining ships. As the smoke cleared, Jake found himself standing next to Queen Zerathal on the temple's observation deck. The mixed fleet hung in the sky above them like a symbol of hope. How did they know to come? Jake asked. Queen Zerathal smiled. While we were preparing for these negotiations, I was also secretly communicating with moderate leaders on both sides. Admiral Rodriguez and Fleet Commander Zeltath have been working together for weeks to plan this moment. You mean this was all planned? Not the attack by the hardliners, she said, but the cooperation between our reasonable leaders, yes. Your act of kindness on Xerion Prime gave me the idea, but it took many people working together to make it real. Over the next several hours, Jake watched as the formal peace treaty was signed in the same temple where he had just helped defend against attack. The document was called the Martinez Accords, named after the soldier whose compassion had started everything. But Jake barely paid attention to the speeches and ceremonies. He was thinking about how much had changed since that day when he found an injured alien in a crashed ship. 3 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the first joint human Vorthok research facility. Through the large windows, he could see ships from both species docking together peacefully. Queen Zerathal joined him at the window. She no longer wore formal royal robes, but practical work clothes like everyone else on the station. The peace treaty had been successful, but implementing it required hard work from both species. Do you ever regret it? She asked. That day on Xerion Prime when you decided to help me instead of following orders? Jake thought about all the people who had died in the war, all the destruction and suffering.
Ow.
Then he looked at the mixed crews, working together outside the window. No, he said honestly. I think it was the most important thing I've ever done. Queen Zerathal reached into her pocket and pulled out the crystal pendant she always carried. I have something for you. She handed him the pendant, and Jake saw that new symbols had been carved into the silver chain. What does it say? It's both our names in ancient Vorthok script. The crystal of Vorthmar traditionally stays with the person who showed honor, but I wanted you to have both of them. Jake held up his own pendant. The two crystals glowed brightly when they came near each other, just like they had in the temple. What will you do now? Jake asked. Help build the future we started, Queen Zerathal replied. There are still people on both sides who oppose peace, but every day, more humans and Vorthok work together successfully. Every day, the idea becomes more normal. Jake nodded. He had accepted a permanent position as cultural liaison between the species. His job was to help solve problems and misunderstandings before they became conflicts. And you? The Queen asked. The same thing. Help people understand that former enemies can become friends if they're willing to try. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the busy activity outside the station. Human and Vorthok engineers worked side by side on new technologies. Scientists from both species shared research that was advancing knowledge faster than either could alone. 5 years later, Jake attended the dedication ceremony for the Xerion Prime Memorial. The monument was built on the exact spot where he had found Queen Zerathal in the crashed ship. It honored all the people who had died in the war while celebrating the peace that followed. Queen Zerathal spoke to the crowd of humans, Vorthok, and other alien species who had gathered for the ceremony. Her words were translated into dozens of languages. We gather here today not just to remember the past, but to commit ourselves to a better future. The human soldier who showed mercy in this place proved that even in the darkest times, compassion can light the way to peace. After the ceremony, Jake walked through the crystal forest where everything had started. The trees still hummed in the wind, but now the sound seemed peaceful rather than ominous. He pulled out both crystal pendants and held them up to the light. They glowed as brightly as ever, a reminder that some bonds transcend species and time. Jake had learned that being a hero didn't require great strength or special powers. Sometimes it just meant choosing to help someone who needed it, even when that choice was difficult or dangerous. As he walked back toward the memorial, Jake saw human and Vorthok children playing together in the Crystal Grove. They laughed and ran without any thought that they were supposed to be enemies. Maybe that was the real victory. Not the peace treaty or the joint stations or the end of fighting. Maybe it was simply that future generations would grow up seeing cooperation as normal instead of remarkable.